Welcome to another exciting episode of CAN Amplify. Today, we have a special guest with us, Dr. Akosua Lesesne, to explore the legacy of Black teaching excellence. Dr. Akosua will be sharing her insights on the key aspects of Black teaching excellence, the development of the Black teaching tradition, and the historical marginalization of these traditions. We will also discuss the benefits of reintroducing these traditions into early education classrooms and how educators and schools can support this integration. Get ready as we delve into the principles of Black teaching excellence and the impact they can have on early childhood education. Welcome, Dr. Akosua.
Thank you, Alicia. It's wonderful to be here with you today.
Yes, I'm so happy that I was able to get you here. You are available to participate in our first episode of our second season of CAN Amplify.
Wow.
And I think the timing of it is perfect because this is for Black History Month, and you are going to give us a history in Black teaching excellence and talk about Black teaching tradition. So I'm going to start off with some fun questions, and then we'll kind of get into the meat of our conversation, okay?
Okay, that sounds great.
All right. So if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Any superpower? Wow. Okay. So I'm thinking of superheroes, right? So there's some who can like go through walls and climb up walls and all this stuff. And there's the Hulk, right, who gets really big and strong. I think if I could have any superpower, I would like to be able to fly. I would like to be able to fly. Yes. Is that
Why?
a superpower? I don't know. Is that
It is.
okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why? Why would that be your superpower?
So I've always been fascinated with the sky and outer space, right? And so I remember learning about like the cumulus clouds. I don't know if I remember that right now, but like all the different types of clouds. And I just remember being like fascinated with like cloud formation. I was born and raised in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So for nearly the entire year, the sky is clear and you could like see the different shapes in the clouds, right? And they're all like, lying up and saying, oh, that's Pluto or that's the shape of a dog or whatever. So yeah, I think I'd like to kind of be up there either in the atmosphere or outer space as well. So my superpower, my flying ability would definitely include outer space because I've always been fascinated with outer space as well. And maybe that too, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe that too has to do with growing up in Florida because we're right here where the space shuttles launch and things like that. So
Hmm.
we've always been very close. Like some people take field trips there. We've always been very close to NASA. I don't know if that station is still down here in Florida, but yeah. So I think I'd want to be able to kind of visit those spaces that brought me a lot of like joy and fascination as a kid, just in real time. Just go on up there, see what's
Okay.
up. Yeah.
Which superhero has? I think that's Captain Marvel, right?
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Right. Right. And Superman, Superwoman. Right. So like you're
Hmm.
bringing, yeah, you brought this back to my memory. Yes. So yes, I think that those would be. I mean, they fly to like go save people. I don't know if that would be a part of it for me. It would just for me just be. I want to fly to escape and experience wonder and all those good things.
I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
Discovery.
Yes. Yes.
So is it safe to say that little Akosua wanted to be an astronaut?
I did. I did. That is very safe to say. I mean, along with a journalist and a lawyer, because Little Akosua also grew up in the wake of Oprah, right? And so I
Hmm.
know so many people in my generation who went into communications, and all of a sudden, like, we could see ourselves, right? Like, as broadcast journalists and talk show hosts and things like that. But yes, um, astronaut was definitely, definitely one of those things. Astronaut, aeronautical engineer, like for a very short period of time. But yes, absolutely.
Really awesome.
Yeah.
I love it when kids have like those
Right.
because they seem like they're far, but it's like, no, that's actually pretty realistic. Like you
Right,
could
right,
definitely
right.
be an astronaut.
I can be an astronaut,
Yeah.
yes. Exactly. And shout out to Mae Jemison, right? I think she was the first African
Hmm.
American. I don't know if she was the first African American woman or African American at all, but yeah. This is all like bringing back fun memories. I definitely did want to be an astronaut at some point, and was definitely hyped when Mae Jemison made it out into outer space. So
Right.
yes.
That's awesome. Okay, so my next question then is if
Uh
you
huh.
could time travel,
Hmm.
Would you travel to the past or to the future?
Oh, that's a good question. Would I travel to the past or would I travel to the future? If I have to choose, I think I would travel to the future. I think I would travel to the future. And not to bring the mood down, but there's so much happening in the world right now, and I do believe we will move through this moment, and we will move through in a way. It may take a very long time, so I'm not trying to minimize the major tragedies that are happening in this at this time and the people who are being directly impacted by them. um, but just like every other moment, right? Like, I think formerly enslaved people didn't imagine that slavery would ever end. Like, it lasted for 246 years, right? So can you imagine
Mm-hmm.
having hope that one day, like, there will not be this form of enslavement? And so I am not remembering the poet or the person who said this, but I see it a lot where it says, "A new world is coming. I can hear her breathing," right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, and I that may even be a misquote, but you get the point. And so I think I'd like to travel to the future, to the point where we see that new world, right? And then also,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like as a former high school teacher, I've planted some seeds, and I'd like to kind of see, like, like, where did those, what came of those things? And so,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely, yeah.
All right. I like that. Okay.
Perfect.
So my
Okay, so
last fun question.
okay.
What is the best piece of advice that you've ever been given?
The best piece of advice, I don't know if this is the best piece of advice that I've ever been given. It's the most one it's the one I remember most recently, because I have a lot of elders in my life, and that's not necessarily tied to age, but I have a lot of people in my life who I can turn to for, lots and lots of wisdom. So the latest piece of advice, that I remember, is don't get distracted.
Hmm.
And in fact, it was actually said to me in a different way. It was said to me actually more directly, because I was reeling about, like, just something that, and I'm sure you can relate, like, in the field of education, there are just lots of things that happen either on a micro level or a macro level or just interpersonal, that can make you feel discouraged about true educational equity, like that it will actually come, that it will come
Mm-hmm.
for Black children, that it will come for the most vulnerable children. And so I remember I was reeling about some foolishness that was happening in education, and about someone who was, like, perpetuating this foolishness in education and getting a lot of public attention. And I'm like, and so I was just, like, really, like, oh my God, no, 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 I can't believe people can't see through this and that. And one of my elders, I think I either texted her or called her, and she either wrote back or said very directly, "It's a distraction.
Mm-hmm.
Keep building what you're building." So I guess
Yeah.
it's both and, right? It's a distraction from the work that you're doing. Keep doing the work that you're doing. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah. So every now and then, but you know how elders are just, like, real direct and don't have time for your foolishness. So, or can be. I don't want to stereotype, but it was like, but it cuts through, right?
Yeah.
Like, she did not, like, acknowledge my reeling. She didn't acknowledge all my tirade. She just said, "It's a distraction."
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And that's very relevant. I feel like not just in education, I think
Mhm.
in just our general lives, like
Yes.
we can find so many different things that are just there to kind of like veer us off,
Right.
you
Right.
know?
Yes. Yes. It's pure foolishness, though. It's pure, like, the stuff is absolutely pure foolishness, but it's like, okay, I'm gonna, I see
Mm-hmm.
that happening over there, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
distraction. Yes,
Right.
it's foolish. It is foolish, but I'm gonna, yeah.
I'm not gonna focus on it.
I'm not gonna focus on that. I'm going to keep building, right? I'm going to keep
Yeah.
doing what I'm doing. Yeah.
Yeah. So
That
let's
was
talk a
also
little
like an
bit.
affirmation. I'm sorry. That was also like an
No, no.
affirmation, like, of her respect for what I was doing, because she's very intimately knowledgeable about my work, right? And
Oh,
so it was, like, not general. It's very specific. Like, you're doing what needs to be done. Keep building that.
yeah.
Keep doing that. Yeah.
No, that's great. That's great. I think especially when, because sometimes you could get that from someone else, and it's like, well, you don't know what I'm dealing
Right.
with, and so it's like
Yes.
to have someone that intimately knows
Yes.
what you're doing, where
Yes.
you're going. Yeah, that is great advice.
Awesome.
So let's talk a little bit about what you've been doing, right? And
Yeah.
so why don't you? I talk to the audience more about yourself, right?
Okay.
And what led you, because our episode here is about Black teaching excellence, right? The
Yes.
history of it.
Uh-huh.
So tell us about yourself and what led you to exploring Black teaching excellence.
Absolutely. So I am Dr. Akosua Lesesne, Akosua or Dr. Akosua, or however you'd like to address me. And I am what I would call now an educational design leader. So I have two companies, a nonprofit, or I have the pleasure of leading and co-creating two companies, a nonprofit and a for-profit, both focused on the legacy of Black teaching excellence, right? Or both inspired by the legacy of Black teaching excellence. And so prior to founding my companies in 2018, I had about 15 years of experience in districts, right? So I started my career in 2003 as a high school social studies teacher in my hometown in Broward County, Florida, Broward County schools. And then you know how like when you're teaching, you start to develop your own passions and realize your own skills, right? So some teachers are really good at like experiential learning, or some teachers are really good at project-based learning. And so I really developed and discovered skills around program development, grant writing, project based learning, integrated learning, educational technology. And so all of these things kind of, and then of course, just being passionate about educational equity on behalf of Black children in general, and just in particular, and children in general, right? The most vulnerable children. And so, got to a point in my career where I was ready to launch out and offer those things, to other folks in the form of consulting and my own programming and things of that nature. But when it comes to um, the legacy of Black teaching excellence, I first came, even though it's a robust body of research, I first came to know about it because I was a product of the legacy of Black teaching excellence, right? So, meaning that I only had, I count every now and then and I always forget the number, but I think I only had like five Black teachers from like early childhood all the way through higher education, like all through my doctorate. I think sometimes it toggles between like 5 and 8 when I like tally it up. Um, and so it's not that like some people they had a plethora of Black teachers, and that's when they realized the specialness of the pedagogy that exists among excellent Black teachers. But for me, it was those few that I had that like kind of made the difference for me, like, oh, this is a different experience than the
Mm,
experience that I had been having. But even before that, being the product of, I guess maybe like the secondhand product of Black teaching excellence, because growing up in the South and growing up among elders and aunts and cousins and parents and grandparents who experience schooling in all Black school settings, right? And not just all Black school settings where their children are all Black, but all the teachers were all Black, and it was within Black communities, right? And so the research that I've talked about and I'm going to talk about throughout this podcast, like deep, rich body of research that's like 6 generations old, right? That's like, yes, those things are true that you read historically, that those schools were starved for resources. They were the victim of attacks, right? Burned down, in this
mm,
racially hostile environment. And what was happening at the same time, that there was what I call pedagogical genius that was emerging among the Black teachers because they were responding to the moment, and also responding to the moment, taking full responsibility, right, for what they were tasked to do with Black children. And so I would just you it just was just ubiquitous, right? It was just a part of my life that everywhere I went, barbecues, dinner tables, church cookouts, everywhere you go, you overhear stories, right, of this generation of people who had these teachers from K-12 just mention, oh, Miss Carter, when I was in the 3rd grade, Miss Carter insisted that I learned how to read, and she made me stay after school every day, and she drove me home, right? Or when I was in the 4th grade, Miss Johnson, she really taught us math. And she, even though we were poor and other people didn't think that we could learn, she really had this method of teaching us math. And I still remember that. Those
mm,
are not one offs. right? And
Yeah.
so growing up in that community, it's hard for me to explain to if people aren't familiar with that. It's just a part of the stories that you hear at the kitchen table, right? Like
Yeah.
at family gatherings. And you start to, as a child, you start to know those teachers' names, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Coach Gray was the one who helped me write my college application and got me into, so I know the names, like even here in Broward County, right? I know the names. I actually know their names because you hear these stories over and over and over again in our cultural lives, right? And so that really is where it started. Even though I ended up becoming an applied researcher and doing the research and applying that to my practice, I really came to know about it because it's these people, like this class of educators is just a part of my cultural history and the oral history that I grew up just all around me.
Yeah, it's to me it resonates with the village, right?
Yes.
So the village, it takes a village to raise a child, right? And Black teachers, the our neighbors, the corner store
Yes.
owner, like
Exactly.
all of these people are in our village, right? And they
Yes.
all have influences on our children.
Right.
And when they take like a keen responsibility of like helping to make sure that they're guiding this child, that's what that reminds me of.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned that because the legacy of Black teaching excellence and the Black teaching tradition, which we're going to talk about soon, is what I call culturally mediated, right?
Mm,
So you learn it in the home. It's reflective of a certain tradition of a way of being, as you said, a collective way of being with all children. And so even though my mother is not a teacher, I can look back and see ways that she raised us and philosophies that she had in the home that are reflective of the legacy of Black teaching excellence because it is culturally mediated, right? And then you
mm-hmm.
take those cultural values, and then a person who decides to become a teacher, they bring those values into teaching, and it manifests itself in a legacy, and that legacy
Yeah.
has resulted in Black teaching excellence. And I say Black not because it doesn't apply to anybody else, because certainly these teachers are role models for everybody, but I'm saying Black as its origin for what I studied.
Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So, what are some key aspects of Black teaching excellence?
Yeah, so I mentioned, the Miss Carter made me stay after school, right? Right. And so high expectations is definitely like just all the way through high expectations. Um, and high expectations, not to be mistaken with like a punitive or military style approach that
Hmm.
we know is far too frequently happens with Black children, right? High expectations is like, yes, you are going to, for instance, learn physics. You are
Hmm.
going to learn calculus. um, but I'm not going to sit at the board and stand over you and yell at you or exact corporal punishment to make you learn it. There is care, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to exercise my personal authority. So yes, Alicia, come in here and have a seat, and you're going to stay with me for 2 hours, right?
Hmm.
And at that time, I may offer you a snack. I'm going to ask you about your mom. There's a very warm relationship, but it's not the type of warm relationship where you're going to get out of learning physics, right?
Right.
And and these high expectations are tied to the notion that your success is my success, and our
Mm,
success is the success and actual liberation and freedom of the race, right? And so high expectations is one that you'll see through all, because my framework is not the only one that's out there. High expectations in one way or the other is one that you're going to see through all of it, and one that you hear in these stories that I just told you, right? That I grew up hearing. Um,
so
there's also, yeah,
it's like I know you're capable, and I'm not going to allow you to give up on this, even though this is
right,
difficult. So this is
right.
what we're going to do.
This is what we're
And
going to
we're
do.
going to do this until
We're
you've
gonna
got it.
until you've got, I'm going to support you. I have the skills I have the pedagogical instructional skills to get you there.
Hmm.
And yes, it's late and you might be hungry. Here's a snack, right? And we may hug it out afterwards.
Right. And you're going to get frustrated with me, but we're going
And
to
that's,
learn. You're going to learn this thing.
and I'm not going to care, right? Like
Right. Right.
because yeah, it's both and then tied to that is that caring, right? So in the research it's called the ethic of care, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so is that genuine, I care about you as a person. I think in the research it's now called people are now talking about it as humanizing, right, pedagogy, where it's like, no, you are a human being who has walked in here, and I am going to care for you. But again, not in this way that lets you off the hook, not in this way that I have
Right.
low expectations for you, right? I'm going to care for you, and you still go learn calculus, right? Like
Exactly.
because you said you wanted to be an engineer, and I believe in that. I believe in you. But guess
Mm-hmm.
what? To be an engineer, to get into undergrad, you got to learn calculus. And yeah, so yeah,
Yeah.
I would say the high expectations, the caring, um, yeah, I think those are the ones that you'll find. I mean, so you'll different models will have other like more, detailed, not differences, but just ways that they talk about it. But I would say that those are probably just two examples of the type of ways that black teachers and excellent black teachers have shown up for generations. Oh, I will say one more thing. Critical consciousness, right?
Okay.
So that's what they're, and again, that's what we're calling it in the latest research, but really it's tied into the high expectation and the caring of like there's a world out there that has some really ugly truths for you as a black student, for us as black people. I need you to be conscious of those of what those things are, conscious of those systems, able to critically analyze how they're impacting your life. So yeah, so people will call it different things. I think, like I said, the latest thing people are calling it is critical consciousness. They may talk about like this political education, that type of thing, but it's really embedded in that. So no matter what new terms come up, like because in education we have new terms that come up. Black teachers have been doing that and have just been doing that as a part of their teaching for hundreds of years,
Mm.
because again, they when they looked at the task before them, so we're not just educating children, we're educating children who are under oppressive regimes. So it's part of my responsibility as your
Right.
teacher, right, to equip you to not only analyze those things, but together, because our destinies are tied together, help you figure out, and help us figure out together how to overcome those obstacles, and go against those systems. So
So if I were to define it,
yeah.
it would critical consciousness is the ability to have awareness and to apply critical thinking and problem solving.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And some people call it social political consciousness. Yeah, absolutely, right. Because imagine, the Black teaching tradition, as I study it, kind of starts actually before the end of enslavement, right? And so Black
Mm-hmm.
people were teaching each other, sneaking and starting schools. Education was all it was, and still remains a core part of this. But imagine me teaching you how to read and not having you have a critical analysis about the fact that we're in bondage. Like
Right.
it's just not a thing, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just not a thing. And so to these days we talk about it as an add-on, but those days, and even now, like even with contemporary Black teachers or teachers who are teaching according to this legacy of Black teaching excellence, you would just never think not to do it, because
Mm-hmm.
it's just so embedded, right, that it doesn't
Yeah.
even sometimes doesn't even have to be named or have a separate name for that thing. It's just teaching. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Okay. All right. I like that term, critical consciousness.
yeah. Yes. And in fact,
So,
in the research, it says that students who have a high level of critical consciousness actually do better on all these measures that we care about, right? So,
mm,
yeah, I mean, so it's just a good thing, but we want to also see outcomes, and that the research supports that.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, did your discovery, your exploration,
Yes.
right, of Black teaching excellence, is this what led you to developing the Black teaching tradition?
It is. Yeah, it
Okay.
absolutely is. And that discovery has unfolded in various phases, right? So hearing about it as a young person, and it just, when you hear about it so often, it's just a fact for you, right? But then I became a teacher, And in the process of becoming a teacher, I realized that there is this other narrative about Black teachers, Black schools, especially those in segregated times, that is just false. It's the
Mm.
opposite. That these teachers weren't equipped, right? That Black families didn't care about education, that the Black community wasn't equipped to educate their children, that nothing good, even, yes, the schools were dilapidated and starved for funding, but that there was nothing good going on in those schools, right? And so I came into contact with that very false view from my, not just my colleagues, even um, in my pre-service experience. I was in a program that focused on urban education, right, which we know is, students of color, a good number of Black students. And I remember just casually saying to my professor, like, "Hey, we're doing urban education. Why don't we study, you know, the legacy of Black teaching excellence and try to incorporate?" And this person, a professor in a teacher education program, said, "Oh, well, but they didn't learn anything in those schools." So that was at the professor level, right? So it
Mm.
shows you just how ubiquitous that false narrative is. And
Mm-hmm.
then when I became a teacher, same thing. I was starting a program with a group of teachers, and the coordinator of that program, and both of these people happen to be non-Black, but even Black folks don't know this history, right, and have bought into those narratives. And I said, "Hey, we're doing this at-risk program. Why don't we look into these strategies here locally?" And this person said, like, with surety, like, "Oh no, but those students, no one got what they needed in those schools."
Mm.
And so it was this understanding that there is this tradition out here, and also that I want to live up to and live into as a teacher. But then also, gosh, what do I do about the fact that it's this this false narrative, right,
Yeah.
that I confront, and in the research, right, Vanessa Siddle Walker, if you hear her talk or read her books, she talks about confronting the same thing in the research. And that's why she wrote the books that she wrote, to say, no, 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 no. There's this narrative out here. But let me tell you what was really happening
Mm-hmm.
in these schools. And so yeah, I think that's my windy way of saying, like, at very through very different entry points, or through various entry points, it absolutely inspired me to say, no, there is this tradition, there is this legacy, and it's still having impact, and it's worthy of grooming people. It's worthy of learning more about it, documenting it, talking about it, putting it out there, and it's worthy of developing generations of teachers in this
Mm-hmm.
legacy. So yes, in lots of different ways, it inspired me from many vantage points. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So how have these traditions, and you talked about just like the lack of awareness or the
Mhm.
misinformation, right,
Yeah.
about around this. So how have these traditions been historically marginalized or overlooked?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the major moves of marginalization is that when we began to implement the Supreme Court decision, to desegregate schools in 1954, and for the couple decades, because it took some people a couple decades to actually to start to implement it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the first 11 years of desegregation in, like, um, several southern states, 40,000 Black teachers were laid off.
Oh, wow.
Right. So what, right, right. So what happened was, there's this fight for desegregation in this racially divided, racially hostile country, which is what we were, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Supreme Court says you have to do it. The racial hostility hasn't gone away. The deficit notions about Black people and who we are and who our families are and who our children are haven't gone away. And so integration never happened, right? The efforts at desegregation mainly meant closing the schools that were in Black communities, firing the teachers that were in those schools, or only sending a handful of those teachers out to the white schools, right? Because it wasn't a integration where they were integrating both communities. It was like, we're going
Right.
to close your schools and send your children out. And so they did send a number of black teachers out to white schools, the previously predominantly white schools, only the best, only the cream of the crop, right? They got to select. And then they demoted school leaders, right? So I'm a principal, and all of a sudden now I'm the bus coordinator, right? So for those
Yeah.
things they did. And so when you talk about the marginalization of this tradition, you have to start there, right?
Hmm.
Because no other conversation makes sense after that. Like, no other
Yeah.
conversation makes sense if you don't. So, because now people will cite, oh, less than 7% of school teachers are black. And then if you don't have that historical knowledge, you start to say things like, well, well, black people don't want to teach, or, after opportunities opened up to them, they stopped teaching and got more higher paying jobs. As a whole, um, that's not true, right? So there are
Hmm.
instances of that, but black teachers, beginning with desegregation, had been pushed out and are continue to be pushed out of the field.
Hmm.
Um, and so, you have to start the conversation around marginalization of this teaching tradition with that, and then after that, everything will make sense to you, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think when there were laws that, like, if we give them any critical thought, right? Laws that were passed to provide benefit to our communities also had some unthought about consequences
absolutely,
that,
absolutely.
on the same hand, devastated a lot of the communities as well.
Yes,
And so that's
yes,
what this sounds like. It sounds like, desegregation, in this form, because I think it happened in other ways too, with desegregation and how it negatively affected Black communities. But it also sounds like, what we then took was, well, we're going to take away everything you have already built, right? And then we're going to force you into this space where you're not wanted.
wanted.
And it
Yes,
takes away everything that you've worked towards, and you can no longer teach and practice in this way.
right, right, exactly. And that's the point, in this way, right? So even if you're still teaching, you don't have other black colleagues. You don't have that culture of the school, where you could do the things that you had done in the ways that you had done it, as a culture of the school, not just my singular person in this classroom, right?
Yeah.
And so imagine the devastation all the way around, losing mentors, right? So if I'm a new
Mm-hmm.
teacher and I come into a school where this is the ethos of the school, even that informal mentorship, right, is now gone. So just think about that, generation after generation after
Yeah.
generation. Dr. Leslie Fenwick wrote a book called Jim Crow's Pink Slip, where she provides, and it's pretty recent, where she provides an even more detailed numbers. I think at some one point, one number that she cites is like 100,000 like black educational
Mm.
professors who were impacted, in pretty insidious ways. Again, being, going from principal to being demoted to like custodian or custodial head, or, it was pretty involved and
Yeah.
and insidious. So yeah, so I think that's where I would start to answer the question. There's a longer answer, but I mean, this is more a multifaceted answer. But I think, to answer the question of how, the detriment and how this teaching tradition, this legacy of Black teaching excellence has been marginalized, you have to start with that history.
Absolutely. And I wonder, with that, right? We go back to this critical consciousness we
Yeah,
talked about
yeah,
earlier. I would love to, I like history, like,
yeah. Me too. Me too. I was a social studies teacher, so high school. Yeah, I liked it too.
like history is, it's kind of my jam. But
Yeah.
um I would love to know if there were individuals that applied that critical consciousness during this time and said, okay, this is what's happening, this is how this is affecting us, this is how we're going to keep this going, right? And how do I find a way to live in this system, that's this new system that they've created for us, and still continue with this legacy of Black teaching excellence?
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and I think that comes in the form of the movement for independent Black schools, the African centered schools, the fraternities and the sororities with their mentorship programs, and out of school programs. And even we talked about the individual Black teacher. It now, kind of isolated himself, herself, or themselves in the school. Those Black teachers became, even from their individual classrooms, then became icons, right? Because
Mm,
they were the ones, and I did a little bit of this when I was a teacher, right? They were the ones you knew you could go to Miss Lesesne to help you with your college application. You knew you could go and find a tutor in her classroom. So yes, it definitely continued. Um, in diminished meaning diminished in number but not
yeah,
impact, right? And not in the soul of it. Yeah. Into this generation now, right? Because even though we're less than 7% of the teaching population, several recent, like in I think 2018, 19, recent large quantitative studies, right? So for whom that's important, large quantitative studies recently in the past 5 or 6 years have shown that black teachers, even at 6%, are disproportionately more impactful in just about every measure of student achievement,
mm,
um, than their white counterparts who make up over 80% of the population. So we're talking about, being gifted education. Black students are less likely to be suspended, more likely to go to college, like literally every single measure of,
yeah,
of, of student impact. And so for me, my claim is that disproportionate impact, even in our diminished state, number wise, is tied to this tradition.
yeah.
So that's my claim. That's what I'm gonna stand on that.
I can see that. I can see
Yeah.
that. So, bringing it back to early childhood,
Yeah.
what are the benefits of, I would say, reintroducing these traditions into
Mhm.
early childhood classrooms? Because
Mhm.
if I'm hearing this through this lens, right,
Yeah.
historically, it had to start when they were young. It didn't start at
Absolutely.
elementary school or middle or high school.
Right.
So, what are those benefits of kind of reintroducing these traditions into early classrooms?
Absolutely. So, like the research that we talked about just now, indicates that these teachers, so, Black teachers certainly, and I think Black teachers who are teaching according to a certain legacy of Black teaching excellence with these very specific elements in them, um, you know, so the research I think indicates or helps us to know that having more Black teachers teaching according to this tradition will impact all these various measures, and certainly the earlier the better, right?
Mm-hmm.
um, Another thing I will say to answer that question is we think about like Black early childhood educators, right? So just like we have folks who were school founders and taught at the higher level, like Mary McLeod Bethune and Nanny Helen Burroughs and Charlotte Hawkins Brown, we also have Ruby Forsyth Middleton, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, or Ruby, is it Ruby Middleton Forsyth? I'm sorry. Like, she taught in the early childhood space, and there's so many, and I believe that you all have those resources in your resource bank. There are teachers in the early childhood space who I would argue were teaching according to this legacy of Black teaching excellence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's Ruby Middleton Forsyth. Like, so for example, taught in South Carolina in the Sea Islands, where they say, like, Gullah Geechee culture, and where they say, well, these children will never learn how to read. Every single child who came to her center learned how to read, right? And so, so just tying back to your question, that certainly we have historical figures, right, right, specifically in the early childhood space, that will show us benefits of that. And then also another tie that I like to make is that early on, the legacy of Black teaching excellence manifested itself in literary practices, in literacy
Mm-hmm.
practices, because we're looking at enslaved people who were literally forbidden by law, under the threat of death, from learning how to read. But guess what we did? We taught each other how to read. Like, we
Mm-hmm.
created schools, we created networks, non-Black people who were willing to risk their lives to help us teach us that. So literacy is a major part of this legacy, and we
Yeah.
have hundreds of years of history. And so certain, and that's, starting from very young ages. And so I think the earlier the better, right? Like how a tradition this powerful, how could it not be of a benefit, right? From the moment you encounter a school environment or learning environment. And certainly, though, there are specific historic figures and strategies and just a whole kind of commitment around literacy and early childhood. So
Okay. So, we have not already told the audience, but you'll be presenting on Black teaching tradition,
yes,
and how it's connected with the CDA,
yes,
very soon. And one of I would say one of the more exciting things that I've been able to see from the development of this are your quilts.
yes.
And so my next question is, can you share an example of how you incorporate the Black teaching tradition into your teaching methods, and or
Yes.
how can early educators and
Mm-hmm.
in very clear examples, right, of
Yes,
how
yes,
they can move from one way
yes,
to then incorporating this into their teaching method tomorrow, right?
yes, yes, yeah, absolutely. So Alicia is talking about what I call instructional quilts in this exciting project that we're doing with the CDA, and these instructional quilts have, as you mentioned, specific examples of how you can incorporate build your background knowledge, but certainly, and build your background and skill knowledge and incorporate specific instructional strategies, right? For each of the standards. So the Black teaching tradition is a framework that I created out of a literature review that I performed during my dissertation. And what I mentioned earlier that there's like over this research, this body of research is over like 6 decades deep. So I did a literature review. A lot of it is like historical data, narrative, things of that nature. There are some frameworks, but I was looking for pedagogical implications. So, what are the pedagogical implications of these accounts that I'm reading, right? And so, the Black teaching tradition is a framework for pedagogical genius, which is what I've termed it, and it has 9 elements. So, to your question, let me think. For example, one of the elements, as I mentioned earlier, that kind of threads through the entire legacy of Black teaching excellence is, let's say, professional expertise, right? And so, professional expertise is was this value around seeing that teaching there was a technical expertise, a science and an art to teaching,
Mm,
that those who are teaching within the legacy of Black teaching excellence and according to the Black teaching tradition framework are committed to learning specific instruction, committed first and foremost to continue students doing quote unquote non-traditional, meaning like not just sitting in desks in rows and looking at the teacher. You may be doing call and response. So that's one example, right?
mm-hmm.
So I'm teaching. Give me something that we teach in early childhood numbers. Let's give me just one example. I'm sorry. I came from high school, you all, so I'm excited to be learning well with this project. But just yeah,
Let
give me a subject. Yeah,
let's say it is about what's very it could be about plants, right?
about plants, right? And so, yes, we'll have pictures of plants. They'll, maybe have some, materials about plants. They might be coloring plants in, but according to the Black teaching tradition and, culturally relevant and responsive teaching and the legacy of Black teaching excellence, I may have made up a song, right? And I'm doing call and response. And
Mm,
so I'm doing a call, like I'm saying some, I may be teaching you a particular element. I can't sing, so I can't give you an example right now. But so I put it into call and response as opposed to just sort of like fill in the blank or just a general large classroom conversation where I'm calling on one child at a time to answer the question. That I've actually made up a song with the different elements. So they're learning it through song.
mm,
They're learning it through rhythm, and so maybe I even put some movement to this call and response song, either made it up or found it somewhere, but it becomes a part of my classroom. And so that speaks to the what would I see as far as the instructional quilts. If I walk in, in one classroom, you might see students just, kind of just writing it out or coloring it in, or like I said, answering in a large group, as opposed to every single child being engaged, not only with their call and response, but also physically. So I've put movement to it, right, to be symbols of the tree. And, speaking of the Black teaching tradition, one person that I would like to name here is Miss Harriet Ball. So if
Okay.
you go online and see, Miss Harriet Ball was a master teacher. And so there's a clip, and maybe we'll link it here, where I think she's teaching measurements, and she created this whole rap, right? Where the
Hmm.
students are calling out the different, like, millimeter, centimeter, that type of thing, the different measurements. And so that would be like one live example of, in my classroom, I'm doing more, more engaging, culturally aligned, you know, things with students. Does that answer your question? I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah,
Did you have another
no,
example? Okay.
absolutely. Yes. And
Yeah.
just a little snippet of what they'll expect when they come to the webinar. You have to come to the webinar to get all nine.
Yes. Come to the
So,
webinar to get online. Yes.
so how can, excuse me, how can educators and schools support the
hmm
integration of these traditions?
hmm I would say, one, acknowledging, just acknowledging them. And part of that acknowledgement may be around either educating ourselves, right, that there is this tradition that is there. And then also in that education, it may be sort of undoing some of those biases, right? So some people
Mm-hmm.
may not know about them at all, and that's fine. So now you're educating yourself. But if you're doing that real reflective work and you realize that maybe I don't know about it, or I haven't been open to it because I too carry this bias around, Black people not having had a history of excellence in teaching, or these schools and schools environments having been inferior when there's lots and lots of evidence that they haven't, right? So acknowledging it, within that acknowledgement, doing whatever reflective work we might need to do around, some deficit notions that may be blocking us, from that. And then I would say making space in your center, in your schools, to then start to develop teachers in that, Black and non-Black teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Also, though, certainly having, a commitment to recruiting Black teachers, right?
Yeah.
And then and not just recruiting Black teachers, but also providing them and affirming this legacy that they come out of, and providing them, with an opportunity to develop, like at your center, to develop themselves, like within that legacy, and not make it a marginalized thing, but like this is a part of your package, as a member of this community. Because I will say, when we've done teacher training, on the Black teaching tradition, Black teachers, I think it has the promise to retain Black teachers, because all of a sudden Black teachers will tell us, I feel seen, I feel heard. This is the way I knew that there was something. This is just how I've been instinctively doing things. I now know that it's a part of a legacy that I can
Mm-hmm.
learn more about and that I can grow. And so I feel affirmed, where before I didn't really feel affirmed, because I was doing stuff that maybe people didn't understand or didn't acknowledge, or that came from a longstanding tradition. So I think those are good starting points.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like excuse me, allowing, like, having a safe space for the
Yes, yes,
autonomy to move off of what has already been
yes.
written, to then incorporate what right,
Yes,
and
yeah,
individualizing, right, which is something across the board in early education, as a teaching method, to look at the individual child, right, and
right,
what do they need, and then provide what they need, and not in this cookie cutter way. And that's
right.
what that, I could be wrong, but that's what that sounds like to me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And I love that you mentioned the word autonomy, because when we look at, so I mentioned that I do believe this has the power to increase Black teacher retention if they feel bought in and seen and heard, with the
Mm-hmm.
room to explore this legacy and develop themselves in this legacy. But I love that you said the word autonomy, because when you look at studies as to why Black teachers are leaving, lack of autonomy is one of them, right? That I
Mm-hmm.
don't have this autonomy and authority to do what I know, kind of in me, and
Is
from my
needed.
is needed, right? And to do
Yeah.
it in a different way. So I'm glad that you use that word specifically.
Um, all right, my last question here is so what impact do you hope to see from honoring the principles of Black teaching excellence?
Yeah, so one impact is the increase of Black teachers, right, from early childhood all the way through undergraduate education, so that spans the entire developmental stages, right, of our young people. And as I just mentioned, I do think that this has the power for not only retention, but recruitment and also advancement. So retention, recruitment, and advancement of Black educators beginning in early childhood are things that we all need to focus on, because a lot of us are saying, oh, we need more Black teachers, but what about the ones who are going to leave, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the retention rate of Black teachers is higher than any other group. And then what about the ones who are not coming in? So I recently, I don't remember where it was, but I recently heard someone saying, like, they were talking about this one particular teacher development program in a very large city, and they're like, we literally today in 2024 have zero Black candidates in this program. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to mention the programs that are being closed right now and that type of thing. So certainly I think, yeah, the power, I'd like to see more Black teachers teaching in this tradition, more Black teachers affirmed, wanting to stay and having opportunities to advance in the field, because all three of those measures, recruitment, retention, and advancement, are disproportionately low for Black teachers. And as I mentioned, we're less than 7% at this point. So I would love
Yeah.
to see that, and then also, see the progress and the growth and the flourishing of our children, right? So that's really what this promises to do. And one major example of that is that generation of people who came out of those spaces, right? So the ones that are unknown, like I talked about, my mom and my cousins, and the older people in my town and that type of thing. But then, like, the ones that are known, right? So like Toni Morrison, for instance, went to all Black schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
Martin Luther King, right, up until graduate school. Of course, I'm naming people that everyone knows, but there are generations and generations of people whose names we don't know, who speak very highly of their experiences there and credit their success, not only academic and professionally, but their success as a people and people who are contributing to freedom and liberation, to those experiences. So I'd love to see a comeback of that.
Yeah, I actually do have a add-on question
Yeah,
to that. So for, we know that there are many Black children who are being taught by non Black
absolutely. Yeah.
teachers. So what do you see, what's your hope or the impact you see from that perspective of
Yes.
being a non-Black teacher and then incorporating these principles into my teaching methods?
Well, absolutely. So all of my research and my experiences and my practice lead me to this conclusion that Black teachers are, can, and should be a model, right, for everyone, right? So just because the origin of this, that I'm studying and that I'm exploring, is the Black community, right? And is this tradition of excellence in the Black community, nothing stops people of every race from looking to this tradition, to model themselves after. There's nothing, yeah, there's nothing stopping anyone from doing that.
Okay.
And I think it might be a good idea. Given the outcomes, given the past and most recent outcomes, um, I think I think this group of teachers, this tradition, certainly, can be at least one model, right, in the field. Should be.
Yeah, yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for giving me your time and allowing me the space to be able to ask you some not so hard and some a little difficult
Yeah.
questions. And I really appreciate you being able to really explore this topic with us more and give us some history
Yeah.
on Black teaching excellence and what you've been able to do with the Black teaching tradition. And as I've mentioned already, but we have your upcoming webinar. So
Yeah.
please be on the lookout for that and register once you see that link go live. Um,
Awesome.
and again, I wholeheartedly appreciate you and your time today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
All right. I will see you another time.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye bye.
That's it for this episode of CAN Amplify. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.